I had given 25 years of my life to that company. 25 years of dedication, of arriving before sunrise and leaving long after sunset. 25 years of pouring my energy, my ideas, my entire existence into a place that I had once considered my second home. I had been there since the beginning, back when we were just a struggling startup, trying to carve a space in the corporate world. I had worked side by side with the CEO, Edward Collins, making sacrifices to ensure that we thrived. At one point, this company had meant everything to me. But now I stood in Edward's office, staring at the piece of paper he had just slid across the desk. It took me a second to process what I was looking at. Then my breath caught in my throat. Termination. "This isn't personal," Edward said, his voice calm, almost dismissive. "Not personal?" I lifted my eyes to meet his gaze, searching for any trace of regret, any flicker of emotion. Nothing. His expression was cool, professional, as if I were just another insignificant employee instead of the woman who had stood by him for decades. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "You're firing me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Edward sighed as if this conversation was an inconvenience to him. "We're restructuring," he said. "You don't fit into the new vision." A slow, dull throb started in my temples. New vision. I had helped shape this company. I had spent late nights closing deals. I had handled angry clients, last-minute crises, impossible deadlines. I had been Edward's right hand, the one person he could always count on. And now I didn't fit? I gripped the edge of the chair, trying to steady myself. "What about my severance?" I asked. Edward smirked. "There won't be one." I blinked. I must have misheard him. 25 years of service, loyalty, dedication. I had a contract. "You can't do this," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I have a contract." Edward leaned back in his chair, amusement dancing in his cold eyes. "Read the fine print." A sick feeling settled in my stomach. I had signed that contract years ago, back when I still believed that loyalty meant something. Had I been stupid? Naive? I thought back to all the late nights, the weekends I had worked, the vacations I had canceled. All for this company, for Edward. And now I was being thrown out like garbage. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Look, I know this is difficult," Edward said, feigning sympathy. "But it's business. Business." I felt rage bubbling under my skin, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wouldn't let him see me break. Not yet. "How long do I have?" I asked, my voice flat. Edward checked his expensive watch, completely unaffected by my devastation. "You have until the end of the day to clear out your desk," he said. "Security will escort you out." My pulse pounded in my ears. Security? Like I was some criminal? Like I was someone who needed to be watched, controlled, discarded. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay composed. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't argue. Because deep inside, something in me shifted. A quiet, cold rage settled in my chest. I had given this company everything, and now I would take everything from it. Edward had no idea what was coming. I walked out of Edward's office, my hands trembling as I clutched the termination letter. The hallway felt colder, unfamiliar, as if in an instant I had become a stranger in a place I had once considered my second home. Employees moved around me, some throwing me quick, nervous glances, others pretending not to see me at all. They already knew. Of course they did. News traveled fast in an office like this. Still, no one said a word. No one offered a kind smile, a word of comfort. Nothing. Just silence. I reached my desk and sank into my chair, my mind racing. How had it come to this? I had worked here for 25 years, dedicated my life to this place, and now, no job, no severance, no future. I glanced around at my office, my nameplate, the framed photos, the awards and certificates. All of it felt so meaningless now. I had thought my loyalty meant something. I had thought Edward respected me. But clearly, I had been a fool. I should have seen this coming. In the last few months, there had been signs, small things I had ignored. Edward had stopped including me in high-level meetings. He had begun sidelining my opinions, questioning my decisions, pushing me aside. And I had let it happen. Because I had believed in him. I had trusted him. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Trust? What a joke. I stared at the computer screen, my hands hovering over the keyboard. I could feel eyes on me, people whispering, watching, waiting to see how I would react. Would I cry? Would I storm out? Would I cause a scene? I did none of those things. Instead, I logged into my email and started downloading everything. Client lists, contracts, financial reports, internal memos, everything I had access to. Because if Edward thought he could erase me, he was wrong. I might have been loyal, but I wasn't stupid. Over the years, I had built relationships stronger than any corporate contract. Clients didn't trust Edward. They trusted me. And if he thought they would stay once they found out how he had betrayed me, he had another thing coming. I moved quickly, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I knew security would be monitoring me. I had to be careful. So I did what I did best. I played smart. Instead of downloading files directly, I emailed them to my personal account in small batches, just normal correspondence, nothing suspicious. Every client report I had ever written, every proposal I had drafted. I wasn't stealing company secrets. No, I was taking my work, the work that Edward had built his empire on. A part of me wondered if I should feel guilty, but I didn't. Because Edward had left me with nothing, and now I would make sure he had nothing too. I kept my expression neutral as I continued working. From the outside, it probably looked like I was just wrapping things up, tying loose ends before leaving. But inside, I was calculating every keystroke, every email, every file I sent to myself. It was all part of something bigger. Edward thought he had taken everything from me, but he had underestimated me. A company isn't just about a CEO or a fancy office. A company is about trust. And trust was my greatest weapon. I glanced at the time, 2:17 p.m. I had less than 3 hours before security would escort me out like some criminal. I forced myself to stay calm, moving methodically through my final tasks. Client lists, sent. Detailed reports on high-value accounts, sent. Personal contacts, sent. Every little piece of leverage I had ever built, secured. Then I did something Edward would never see coming. I started making calls. The first call was to Jacob Reed, one of our largest clients. Jacob and I had been working together for over 15 years. He trusted me. He had trusted me long before he had ever trusted Edward. I dialed his number, taking a slow breath as I listened to the ringing. Hello? His voice was warm, familiar. Jacob, I said, keeping my tone steady, professional. Ah, my favorite person. What's going on? I hesitated for just a second, just long enough for him to notice. What is it? He asked, his voice shifting. I exhaled slowly. I just wanted to call you personally and let you know I won't be at the company anymore. Silence. Then, what? I could hear the shock in his voice, the disbelief. I smiled bitterly. Edward let me go today. Jacob cursed under his breath. That son of a... He stopped himself. Are you serious? I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Effective, immediately, I said. No severance. No warning. Jacob went quiet again. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold. He's an idiot. I stayed silent. Then, "What are you going to do now?" Jacob asked. I could hear the genuine concern in his voice, and that's when I knew. I had him. I leaned back in my chair, choosing my words carefully. "Well," I said slowly, "I've been thinking, if I were to start something of my own, would you be interested in following me?" I heard him exhale sharply. Then, without hesitation, "Absolutely." A slow, victorious smile spread across my lips. Jacob Reed was just the beginning. I spent the next 2 hours calling every single major client I had built relationships with over the years. I didn't beg. I didn't try to convince them. I simply told them the truth. I was leaving. Edward had betrayed me. And if they wanted to continue working with someone they could trust, they knew where to find me. By the time I hung up my last call, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. 17 clients. 17 of Edward's biggest accounts, and every single one of them had agreed to leave with me. 70% of the company's revenue gone. And Edward didn't even know it yet. At exactly 5 p.m., security arrived at my desk. I stood up calmly, grabbing my purse. No yelling, no tears, no scene, just a cold, quiet exit. Because my real revenge had already begun. I stepped out of that building for the last time, the cool evening air hitting my face like a wave of clarity. I should have felt broken, defeated, lost. But instead, I felt powerful. Edward thought he had taken everything from me, but he had only freed me. I wasn't just leaving my job. I was starting over, and this time, I wouldn't be working to build his empire. I would be building my own. I drove home in silence, my mind buzzing with ideas. I had 17 clients waiting for me, clients who had chosen me over Edward. That wasn't just loyalty. That was leverage, and I would use it to destroy him. By the time I walked into my apartment, I had already started laying the groundwork. I pulled out my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard. First, I secured a temporary office space. Nothing fancy, just something to get started. Then, I made a list of everything I needed to launch my own consulting firm. Website, legal paperwork, business licenses, a solid team. I wasn't just going to take Edward's clients. I was going to take his entire business model and do it better, faster, smarter, without corruption. The thought made me smile. Edward had spent years stealing my ideas, taking credit for my work. Now, I would return the favor. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. Step 1, make my presence known. I crafted a single strategic email and sent it to every client who had agreed to leave with me. The message was simple. I'm starting something new. You'll hear from me soon. Short, clean, powerful. The moment they saw my name in their inbox, they would know this wasn't over. And neither was I. Step 2, hit Edward where it hurt. I knew exactly how his company worked. I had built its strongest relationships. I had handled every crisis, every setback, every internal issue that could have ruined him. And now, I would use that knowledge to bring him down. I reached out to a few trusted industry contacts, people Edward had burned in the past. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Rumors, complaints, financial irregularities. Edward's company wasn't as stable as it appeared. There were holes in his foundation, and I was about to widen them. I spent the next few days moving quickly, setting up my business, securing partnerships, preparing my launch. Everything was falling into place. And then, it happened. Edward found out. The first sign came through a phone call, I was sitting in my small, newly rented office space, reviewing contracts, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I already knew who it was. I let it ring twice before answering. A familiar voice greeted me. Smooth, controlled, but laced with anger. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" I smiled to myself. "Hello to you too, Edward." There was a pause. Then, "You're making a mistake." I leaned back in my chair, completely unbothered. "No," I said. "You did." His voice hardened. "I built that company." I let out a small laugh. "No, Edward, I did. You just put your name on it." Silence. Then, a quiet chuckle. "You're bitter," he said. "That's what this is about. You're upset, so you're throwing a tantrum." I felt my grip on the phone tighten. Even now, after everything, he still saw me as someone beneath him. But that would change soon. "You made a mistake, Edward," I said. "You assumed I wouldn't fight back." "I don't need to fight you," he said smoothly. "You're nothing without my company." I smiled. "Then why are you calling me?" Silence. I could almost hear his teeth grinding. Good. He was nervous. And he had every reason to be. "This won't end well for you," he warned. "Not for me," I agreed. "But for you? Oh, it's just getting started." Then, before he could say another word, I hung up. I set my phone down slowly, letting the moment sink in. Edward was worried. He was trying to act like he wasn't. But I had known him for too long. I could hear it in his voice. The slight hesitation, the forced control, the sharpness behind his words. Edward was a man who never called first. Yet here he was, reaching out to me. It meant only one thing. He knew I was a threat. And he was trying to stop me before it was too late. But he was already too late. I leaned back in my chair, my heart steady, determined. I had spent 25 years building his empire. Now I had spent only 5 days dismantling it. I wasn't even done yet. But I wanted him to feel the weight of every step I took. I picked up my phone again, this time dialing a number I had memorized years ago. The voice on the other end answered immediately. "Hey, is this real?" I smiled. "You tell me." A pause. Then, "I always knew you were the brains behind that place." I laughed softly. "Took you long enough. You need anything?" "Actually, yes," I said, shifting in my chair. "I need a public statement." Silence. Then, amusement. "Oh, you're really going for the kill, huh?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "All right," they finally said. "I'll take care of it." And just like that, it began. By the next morning, the first headline had dropped. I sat in my car outside a small cafe, scrolling through the article on my phone. High-level executive departs. After 25 years, shocking business shakeup. I sipped my coffee, scrolling further. Inside sources claim that her unexpected firing has already led to mass client withdrawals, causing serious financial concerns for the firm. I smiled to myself. Perfect. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about control. Edward had taken away my job. Now I was taking away his reputation. An hour later, my phone started ringing. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening on Edward's side. Calls from clients. Panic in the office. Whispers in the industry. He had thought I would walk away quietly. Instead, I had made sure my departure was louder than his entire career. By noon, I received a text from Jacob Reed. Jacob. "Did you see the article?" Me. "I might have." Jacob. "Edward just called me." I raised an eyebrow. Me. "And," Jacob, "he's trying to do damage control, wants a meeting." I smirked. Me. "And what did you say?" Jacob. "Told him I'd think about it." Me. "Good. Let him sweat." Jacob. What's the next move? I stared at my phone, my mind already ahead. Edward was panicking. That meant he would try to fix things fast. And that's exactly what I wanted. Because desperate men make mistakes. And I was about to make sure he made the biggest one yet. Jacob's message lingered on my screen, but I barely looked at it. My mind was already ahead, moving pieces into place like a chessboard. Edward was scrambling. That meant he was weak, and weak men were easy to break. I took a slow breath, my fingers tightening around my phone. Now I just had to make sure he shattered completely. The next step was simple but brutal. I needed to turn his own people against him. I had spent years in that office. I knew who was unhappy, who was overworked, who was waiting for a reason to leave. And now, I was about to give them one. I opened my laptop and started drafting a message. Not to the clients, to the employees. By the time I hit send, a small fire had already started inside Edward's company. I knew how these things worked. All it took was one person to speak up, then another, and soon it would be unstoppable. I met Jacob for coffee later that evening. He was already at the table when I arrived, scrolling through his phone with an amused smirk. "Edward's losing it," he said before I even sat down. I raised an eyebrow. "That fast?" Jacob slid his phone toward me. I glanced at the screen, and there it was. A leaked email from Edward himself, sent in a panic to his employees. It was full of empty reassurances. Everything is under control. The company is stronger than ever. Don't believe everything you hear. I almost laughed. He was afraid, and he was right to be. Jacob leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You know," he said, "I always thought you'd run that place someday." I took a sip of my coffee. "So did I." He shook his head. "I don't get it. You built that company from the ground up. Why fire you?" I let out a small breath, my fingers tracing the rim of my cup. "Because Edward never saw me as anything more than an employee." Jacob scoffed. "That was his mistake." I smiled slightly. One of many. The next morning, everything fell apart. Edward had been trying to contain the damage, but he had underestimated one thing: loyalty. Not to him, to me. By noon, 5 more clients had closed their accounts. By the end of the day, 3 key employees had resigned. The foundation of his company, the one I built, was cracking beneath his feet. And the best part? I hadn't even finished yet. The cracks in Edward's empire were spreading faster than even I expected. By the time I woke up the next morning, my phone was already flooded with messages. Some from former colleagues, others from clients, but the most interesting ones from people inside the company. People who were ready to jump ship. People who wanted in. I sat up in bed, scrolling through the messages with a slow, satisfied breath. It was time to make my next move. I picked up my phone and called Jacob. He answered almost immediately. "You seeing this?" he asked, his voice edged with disbelief. "Oh, I'm seeing it." I smiled. "But I need you to do something for me." "Name it." I leaned forward. "I want to meet with every single person who just left that company." Jacob let out a low whistle. "You're really going for the kill, huh?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He chuckled. "All right, I'll set it up." By that evening, I was sitting in a private lounge across from 3 former executives who had all walked away from Edward's company in the last 48 hours. I could see the frustration in their faces, the anger, the betrayal. Good. Because I was about to give them a reason to channel all of it. "I'm starting something new," I said simply, watching their reactions. One of them, a man named Ron, raised an eyebrow. "A competing firm?" I smiled slightly. "Better." Silence. They waited. I leaned forward. A firm that takes everything Edward has left. The shift in energy was instant. I could feel it. The way their postures straightened. The way their expressions sharpened. I had their attention now, and I wasn't going to waste it. You all know why I was fired, I continued. Edward wanted to cut costs. He wanted control. And he thought I was disposable. Ron scoffed. He's an idiot. I smirked. Well, let's make sure he pays for that mistake. For the next hour, we laid out a plan. Not just to compete with Edward, to destroy him. I already had clients lined up waiting to move their accounts. They had trusted me, not him. And now I was about to give them a better option. By midnight, my new company was officially in motion. I sat back in my chair, staring at the empty office space Jacob had just helped me secure. It wasn't much yet, but it was mine, and soon it would be so much more. Meanwhile, Edward was losing control. I knew because my phone buzzed again, an unknown number. I answered, already knowing who it was, a voice tense and sharp. "What the hell are you doing?" I smiled to myself. "Hello, Edward." Edward's voice was sharp, almost frantic. "What the hell are you doing?" I leaned back in my chair, my fingers drumming lightly against the desk, calm, composed, in control. "Just business, Edward," I said smoothly. A harsh scoff crackled through the phone. "You think you can steal my clients and get away with it?" I smiled. "Steal?" I let the word hang in the air. I didn't steal anyone. They chose to leave. Maybe you should ask yourself why. Silence. A heavy, seething silence. I could picture him now. His jaw clenched, his grip tightening around his phone, sweat prickling at his temples. He was scrambling, panicking, and that meant I was winning. "You're making a mistake," he finally bit out. "This industry is cutthroat. You don't have the resources, the reputation." I laughed softly. "Edward, I built your reputation." A sharp inhale. I was the one they trusted. I was the one they came to for advice, for solutions. And now? I let my voice drop. They still do. Another stretch of silence. Then, "I'll ruin you." A threat. A desperate, empty threat. I smiled. "You already did, Edward." My voice was smooth, steady. And look how that turned out. Click. I hung up. It was over. For him. For me, it was just beginning. The next few days were a storm. Clients were leaving Edward's firm faster than he could replace them. His employees, jumping ship. And my new company, growing, faster than I expected, faster than Edward could handle. Within a week, his company was in free fall. Within 2, rumors of bankruptcy started circulating. And within a month, Edward's empire, his so-called legacy, was nothing but ash. The last time I saw him, he looked different. Not the overconfident, arrogant man I had worked under for 25 years. He looked small, defeated. I was walking out of a restaurant when I saw him sitting alone at the bar, a drink in front of him, shoulders slumped. He looked up. Our eyes met. For a second, just a second, I thought I saw something in his expression. Regret? Maybe. But regret wouldn't save him now. He made his choice. And I made mine. I turned and walked away, stepping into the night, into my future. One that was finally mine.